The train screeched to a halt in the middle of nowhere, a dusty station clinging to the edge of the Wyoming plains, where the wind never stopped moaning and the land looked like it hadn't forgiven anyone in a long time. When the door slid open, a single woman stepped down. Her boots met the dry earth with the hesitation of someone who'd never set foot on this side of the world. Her name was Clara Whitmore, 24, all the way from Boston, a mail-order bride whose letters had been answered by silence. The platform was nearly empty except for an old telegraph operator smoking behind the post and a ranch hand loading feed sacks onto a wagon. Both men looked at her the same way, curious, cautious, and a little sorry. Clara adjusted her bonnet against the sun and looked around, eyes searching for the man who was supposed to be here. Eli Carter, rancher, widower, father of one, but the only thing waiting for her was the wind. A letter, months ago, had said, "If you're of kind heart and steady faith, come west. My little girl needs a mother." That was enough for Clara, enough to sell her last piece of jewelry, enough to leave behind a city that had already forgotten her name. She waited another hour as the sun dipped low, her hope cracking with each passing wagon. By the time the last one left, the telegraph man finally spoke. "Ma'am," he said gently, spitting tobacco into the dirt. "Carter Place is 30 miles north. Haven't seen Eli come down in near a week." Clara smiled weakly, though her eyes flickered with something between fear and pride. "Then I'll find my own way." He squinted at her suitcase. "You might not want to do that alone, miss. Folks say the Carters have had it hard since his wife passed. He ain't the same." She lifted her chin, that Boston spine still stiff beneath the prairie dust. "Neither am I." The next morning, she hired a ride from a freckled boy with a mule team and rode into the high country. The land stretched endless, amber grass, low grey skies, and silence so big it could swallow your thoughts. The boy dropped her off at the mouth of a long dirt road that led through cottonwoods and up toward a lonely ridge. That's where she saw it, the Carter Ranch. Weather-beaten fence, a sagging barn, smoke just barely breathing from a chimney. She stepped off the wagon and took her suitcase in hand. Her heart pounded hard enough to hurt. A man came out onto the porch, tall, broad-shouldered, his face half in shadow. Eli Carter looked like the kind of man who used to smile once and forgot how. His hands were scarred, his shirt stained, and his eyes carried the same weary distance as the hills behind him. "You're Clara?" he asked, his voice low, cautious. She nodded. "I am." He stared at her for a long moment. Then he said, "I wrote that letter near half a year ago. Didn't figure anyone'd actually come." "I did," she said simply. Eli's jaw tensed. He looked down at her suitcase, then past her at the wagon rolling away. "Well?" "I ain't looking for a wife anymore." The words landed like cold iron. Clara didn't move. Her throat tightened, but her voice stayed steady. "You wrote that your daughter needed a mother." "I did," he said. "But she don't talk much no more. Barely eats. Can't even stand the word mama." He started to turn away. But then a small figure appeared behind him in the doorway. A girl no older than 6, barefoot, with tangled blonde hair and the ghost of tears on her cheeks. She peeked out, then hid again. Clara's heart softened. She knelt down a little, smiling gently. "Hello there." The child didn't answer. Eli watched, his jaw tightening again. "Her name's Lily," he muttered. Clara nodded, still smiling toward the door. "Hello, Lily. You have a pretty name." The girl said nothing, just stared at the stranger with her father's weary blue eyes. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of wood smoke and old grief. Eli stepped back inside and said quietly, "You can stay the night in the barn. After that, you best head back east." "Ain't nothing for you here." Clara stood there, dust swirling around her skirts, the letter that brought her here still folded in her pocket. Now just words without a home. As she turned toward the barn, Lily's small voice, thin as a whisper, drifted from the porch. "Are you
Gonna be my mommy?
Eli froze. Clara turned slowly. The little girl was staring straight at her, eyes trembling, hands clutching her dress. And in that single question, so small, so fragile, something in all three of them began to shift. The wind went still. The west held its breath. Let's go back to where it all started. The barn smelled of hay and rain that never came. Clara lay awake on a bed of straw, listening to the boards creak as the wind clawed at the roof. Somewhere beyond the walls, coyotes sang to a thin moon. She could still hear that little voice. "Are you going to be my mommy?" playing over in her mind like a song she didn't know the words to. By morning, she hadn't slept. The rooster crowed once, then again, and she rose, brushing dust from her dress and gathering her courage. When she stepped outside, Eli was already splitting wood behind the house. Each swing of the axe sounded like a word he didn't want to say. "I can make breakfast," Clara offered softly. He stopped, breathing hard. "Don't need it." She looked past him toward the small window where Lily's pale face watched from inside. "Maybe she does." Eli said nothing, just gripped the axe tighter. Inside the cabin, Clara found a kitchen bare as a bone, stale bread, half a sack of flour, a pot black with soot. She tied her sleeves up and worked anyway. She mixed what she could, made coffee strong enough to taste like something real. When Lily came to the table, barefoot and silent, Clara smiled gently. "Good morning, sweetheart." The little girl hesitated, glancing toward her father, who gave a small nod. Slowly, she sat. Clara poured her a cup of milk and placed a biscuit on the plate. "It's not much," she said softly, "but it's warm." Lily touched it like she wasn't sure it was real. Then, almost shyly, she began to eat. Eli stood in the doorway, watching with that guarded quietness of a man afraid to hope again. He didn't say thank you, but when Clara finished cleaning, he muttered, "You can stay in the spare room. Till the next train." She nodded, hiding her disappointment. "That'll do fine." That afternoon, Clara walked to the edge of the property to see the town below. A handful of buildings, a saloon, a church, and a general store all squatting in the dust. She went there with Lily's hand in hers, hoping to trade sewing skills for credit or a smile. But when they entered the store, conversation died. The owner, a heavy man with a pipe between his teeth, looked her up and down. "You must be that male bride what nobody sent for." Laughter snickered from the corner, where two ranch hands leaned against a barrel. Clara felt Lily shrink behind her skirt. "I'm just here to buy thread," Clara said, her voice steady. "Well," the man drawled, "you'll find thread and pity both run short out here." She placed her coins on the counter anyway, refusing to let her face fall. "Then I'll take what I can pay for." As she turned to leave, one of the ranch hands spoke up.
"You best be careful.
"That Carter place is cursed. Woman died in that house. Some say he ain't right since." The other added, "Ain't fit for a lady like you. If you're smart, you'll ride east before you end up the same." Clara met their eyes. Not with fire, but something quieter, stronger. "A good man broken by grief is still a good man," she said softly. "It's the ones who mock him I'd fear more." No one spoke after that. She left, Lily's small hand gripping hers tight. When they reached the ranch again, the wind had picked up. Eli was mending a fence post, his shirt dark with sweat. "Town's not very welcoming," she said, placing the thread beside him. "Never was," he muttered. "They think the world ends where their fences do." She studied him a moment. "You were kind once, weren't you?" He looked at her, surprised.
How'd you figure that?
"Only kind men write letters like the one you sent." Something in his eyes flickered. Guilt. Maybe, or the memory of who he used to be. That night, Lily came to Clara's room with a small wooden horse in her hand. Papa carved it, she whispered. For Mama before she got sick. Clara took it carefully, her throat tightening. It's beautiful, Lily nodded.
He don't make things anymore? Not since she went to heaven. The child climbed into Clara's lap without asking, her tiny heartbeat trembling against Clara's chest. Eli passed by the doorway and stopped when he saw them.
The lantern light caught his face, the sorrow, the hesitation. For the first time, he didn't look angry. He just looked lost. Lily, he said softly. Time for bed. The girl yawned and whispered, Can Miss Clara tell me a story first? Eli hesitated, then nodded once. Just one. And in that quiet house where love had died and grief had grown thick as dust, Clara began to speak. Her voice wove through the walls like something fragile but alive. Outside, the wind settled. Inside, something began to mend, but far off, beyond the ridge. A lone rider had stopped at the edge of town, carrying a letter with Eli Carter's name on it. Whatever peace Clara had found was about to be tested. 3 days passed in a quiet rhythm the ranch hadn't known in years. Clara cooked. Lily laughed again, soft, uncertain laughter but real. Even Eli began to eat at the table instead of standing by the stove. It wasn't a home yet, but it was something close. On the 4th morning, the sky turned strange. A cold wind swept down from the hills, scattering dust across the yard. The horses in the corral snorted and stamped. Eli stepped onto the porch, rubbing his neck. Storm's coming, he said, though the sky looked more bruised than grey. Clara joined him, holding her shawl tight.
It feels
different, he nodded once. It's not the weather I'm worried about. That afternoon, a rider came up the road, the same one who'd stopped in town days before. Dust cloaked his coat, and his hat shadowed his eyes. When he reached the gate, he didn't dismount. Eli Carter, he called, voice sharp as a whip crack. Eli stepped down from the porch, his jaw set. You got something for me? The man reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. Got a letter from Judge Thorne. Says you're 3 months behind on land dues. Says if you can't pay, your ranch goes to auction. Eli took the paper and stared at it, the muscles in his jaw working. Tell Thorne I'll pay what I owe, the rider smirked.
Don't reckon he'll wait.
There's folks in town already talking about who'll buy this place.
One name keeps coming up, a Mr. Hanley. Eli's eyes darkened.
Hanley? Same, the man said.
Owns half the county now. Wants the other half.
Guess he figures you've had your run. The rider wheeled his horse around and spat into the dirt. Be smart, Carter. Some fights ain't worth losing your life over. As he rode away, Clara came down the steps, her face pale. Who is Hanley? Eli looked out toward the road. A man who buys dreams cheap and sells them dear. He wanted this land before. My wife and I wouldn't sell. Guess he thinks I'll give in now. Clara's voice was calm but firm. Will you? He didn't answer. He just folded the letter and walked toward the barn. That night, the wind howled again. Clara sat near the fire with Lily asleep in her lap. She heard the barn door slam against the frame, then Eli's boots on the porch. Can't stay here much longer, he said quietly. If the bank sends men, they'll come hard. Clara looked up. You'd rather run than fight? His eyes flashed. You don't understand how this land works.
Out here, the rich don't need a reason, just a paper and a gun. She stood. I understand what it means to lose everything.
But maybe what's left isn't land. Maybe it's her. She nodded toward Lily. Eli's face softened, then hardened again.
You don't know what Hanley's capable of. He ain't alone. Men like him don't ride in the open. They send others. And right then, a sound cracked the silence. The faint echo of hoofbeats out beyond the ridge. Both froze.
The horses in the corral stirred restlessly. Eli grabbed his rifle from beside the door and moved to the window.
2 riders, he muttered.
Maybe more behind. Clara stepped close.
And could it be the sheriff?
He shook his head. Sheriff don't ride at night. The hoofbeats grew louder, slow and deliberate. Whoever it was, they wanted to be heard. Eli lit the lantern and set it near the window. "Get Lily to the cellar," he said quietly. Clara obeyed without question. She lifted the sleeping child, whispering, "It's all right, sweetheart," as she carried her down the narrow steps. Upstairs, Eli stood in the doorway, rifle resting in his hands. Two riders came into view, their faces hidden under wide hats. They stopped just outside the fence. "Evening, Carter," one called.
"Hanley says you've had long enough." Eli didn't move. "Tell Hanley if he wants this place, he can come take it himself." A long pause.
Then the man laughed, a low, cold sound. He might just do that. The riders turned and disappeared into the dark, hooves fading like thunder rolling away. When Eli closed the door, his hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of knowing what was coming. He looked down into the cellar where Clara was holding Lily close, both faces dimly lit by a single candle. For the first time since she arrived, he spoke softly, not as a warning but as a promise. "I won't let them take her, or you." And though the night outside stayed restless, inside that small ranch house, a fragile kind of courage began to burn, the kind that only comes when there's no turning back. The storm hadn't arrived yet, but the wind was already carrying its scent. By morning the sky was the color of old pewter. Eli hadn't slept. He sat on the porch with his rifle across his knees, watching the ridge where the riders had vanished. The prairie was quiet, too quiet, like the world was holding its breath. Inside, Clara moved carefully through the kitchen, her hands steady even when her heart wasn't. She baked bread, boiled coffee, tried to make normal things happen, as if the smell of breakfast might keep fear at bay. Lily came to the table wearing one of her mother's old shawls. She looked small but brighter, her hair brushed and tied with a bit of ribbon Clara had found. "Papa," she asked softly, "are the bad men coming today?" Eli looked at her, and for a heartbeat, the hard lines of his face eased. "Not if I can help it." Clara watched him as she set the food down. "You can't hold a rifle forever," she said. He didn't look at her. "I can hold it long enough." But the words rang hollow. The land around them was wide and lonely. No neighbors close enough to hear a gunshot, no law that reached this far. Hanley owned half the county, the other half feared him. As the morning dragged on, Clara took Lily outside to gather eggs. The child skipped ahead, humming under her breath, a sound that softened the cold edges of the world. "Miss Clara," she said after a moment, "do mommies ever come back from heaven?" Clara's steps faltered.
"No, sweetheart," she said softly.
"But sometimes they send someone kind to watch over us till we meet them again." Lily nodded like she understood more than a 6-year-old should. "Then maybe Mama sent you." Clara blinked hard, the wind stinging her eyes. Maybe she did. Later, when she returned to the house, she found Eli sitting at the table with a bottle open in front of him. The air smelled sharp. "I told you I ain't drinking for comfort," he muttered, not looking up. "Just thinking." "About what?" "About how I can fight a man who owns every friend I ever had." Clara folded her arms. "Then don't fight like him."
"Fight like the man who wrote that letter, the one who still believed in good things." He stared at her.
"You still think I'm that man?" She smiled faintly.
"I wouldn't have come all this way if I didn't." Something fragile flickered in his eyes.
He reached across the table, rough fingers brushing the edge of her hand, then drew back like he'd touched fire. Before either could speak, the sound of hooves thundered from beyond the hill. Eli stood fast, rifle in hand. "They're early." Clara moved to the window. 4 riders this time, their shapes cutting through the haze like dark knives. They stopped at the fence line again. One of them shouted, "We're just here to talk, Carter." Eli didn't answer. He stepped down the porch steps slowly, his boots sinking into the dust. The leader, a clean-shaven man with a fine coat and a cruel smile, tipped his hat.
Hanley says he's willing to offer you a fair price.
Last chance? Eli's voice was calm. This land ain't for sale. The man's smile thinned. You sure about that? You've got a woman and a child now. Be a shame if the place caught fire by accident. Clara felt her blood run cold. She gripped Lily's shoulders, pulling her back from the window. Eli said nothing, just stared the man down. For a long moment no one moved. The wind hissed through the grass like a whisper. Finally the man leaned forward on his saddle. You're digging your own grave, Carter. Eli's reply came like gravel.
I've dug worse. The riders turned and rode off again, but slower this time, like wolves circling before dark. Inside, Clara sank into the chair, shaking.
They'll come back, she said. I know. Eli reloaded the rifle with steady hands. But they'll find I'm not the same man they left here. Lily clutched Clara's skirt. Miss Clara, I'm scared. Clara knelt, pressing her forehead to the child's. It's all right, baby. We're right here. Eli looked at them. The woman who had come from nowhere, the child who had found her again. And something inside him broke and healed at the same time. He walked to them, set the rifle aside and knelt beside his daughter. His voice was quiet, but every word carried the weight of a vow. No matter what happens tonight, he said, you've got a family.
You hear me?
Lily nodded, tears trembling on her lashes. Clara looked up at him. And let's protect it together. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full. Of fear, of hope, of something too human to name. Outside, thunder rumbled over the hills. The storm had found them at last. The first lightning bolt split the horizon open like a blade, throwing the plains into brief daylight. Rain followed in hard, slanted streaks, pounding against the tin roof and swallowing the sound of hooves until it was too late. Eli was already outside when the riders came, 4 of them, lanterns swinging from their saddles, rain gleaming off their coats. They rode through the gate like men who thought God owed them the world. Clara stood in the doorway, Lily clinging to her leg. She wanted to scream for him to come inside, to lock the door, to run. But the look in Eli's eyes stopped her. It wasn't rage. It wasn't fear. It was resolve. Stay with her, he said over the wind. No matter what happens, don't come out. The leader of the riders, the one with the fine coat and the cruel smile, dismounted first. Still standing your ground, Carter. Eli leveled his rifle but didn't raise his voice. You're trespassing.
Leave the girl out of this. The man laughed, lightning flashing across his face.
Girl, word in town says you brought yourself a male bride.
I suppose that makes her yours now too? Careful, Eli warned. The man stepped closer, rain dripping from his hat brim. You could have sold and left.
You chose this. Don't blame us when we finish what grief already started. For a heartbeat, the world held still. Just wind, thunder, and the smell of wet dust. Then Eli spoke, quiet and steady. My wife's buried out back.
You'll not take another woman from this ground. He fired. The shot cracked through the storm, and the leader staggered back, clutching his shoulder.
Chaos erupted, horses rearing, gunfire flashing in the rain. Clara pulled Lily to the floor, shielding her as glass shattered around them. Stay down, baby, she whispered, voice trembling but strong. Outside, Eli fired again, then ducked behind the water trough as bullets chewed into the porch posts. The thunder rolled over the sounds of war, a storm within a storm. One of the riders charged the barn, likely hoping to set it alight, but Clara moved before she could think. She grabbed Eli's spare rifle from the wall, threw open the door, and stepped into the rain. "Clara!" Eli shouted, but she was already aiming. Her hands shook, her breath fast, but her eyes didn't waver. The man turned, saw her too late. Her shot struck the lantern he carried, bursting it into flame that spilled across the mud. His horse bolted, dragging him into the darkness. When the echo faded, only 2 riders remained. They looked at the burning barn and the man bleeding in the dirt, then turned their horses and vanished into the storm. Eli stood still for a long time, chest heaving, rain running down his face like tears he'd been too proud to shed. Clara lowered the rifle, every muscle trembling.
"It's over," she whispered. He walked to her slowly, eyes searching hers like he couldn't believe she was real.
Then, without a word, he pulled her into his arms. For the first time since his wife's death, he let himself hold someone again. When morning came, the world was washed clean, the rain gone, the prairie gleaming with new light. Smoke still curled from the barn, but the worst had passed. Lily came running across the yard, barefoot and smiling through the tears. She threw herself into her father's arms, and for once he didn't flinch. "I thought you'd go away," she said softly. Eli kissed her hair. "Never again." Clara stood nearby, her dress soaked, her hands dirty, her heart too full to speak. Eli turned to her, eyes red from exhaustion and gratitude both. "I don't reckon I deserve what you've done," he said. Clara smiled faintly. "You don't have to. Families aren't earned, Eli, they're made." He looked at her for a long moment, then took her hand, and not out of duty, not out of need, but out of something that felt like beginning again. Weeks later, when the sun set golden over the Carter Ranch, the grass tall and waving, the house no longer felt haunted. Lily's laughter carried through the open windows. Clara sat sewing on the porch, and Eli worked the fence line, his hat tipped low, a man who'd found peace where the world had told him he'd never have any. Sometimes, after supper, Clara would take Lily's hand and walk out to the grave behind the barn. She'd brush the dust from the headstone and whisper softly, "Thank you for sending me." And though no wind stirred, though no voice answered, something gentle always seemed to move through the air, as if the land itself was breathing easier. Because sometimes the West didn't just take things away, sometimes it gave them back, quieter, braver, and stronger than before.